We've all heard of our economic cycles and how, according to most modern economy books, it is normal to have a period of very quick growth and expansion, followed by a period of contraction and economical crisis. As described in 1946 by Arthur F. Burns, former counselor to the President of the United States, and Wesley C. Mitchell, American economist, business cycles are a type of fluctuation found in the aggregate economic activity of nations. A cycle consists of expansions occurring at about the same time in many economic activities, followed by similarly general recessions. This sequence of changes is recurrent but not periodic. History, though, shows us that before the 20th century, financial crises arrived because of external events, the most popular being war. There had been only one financial crisis not attributable to external events, and this was the Panic of 1825, where around 70 banks went bankrupt due to risky investments, and because of this man, Gregor MacGregor, that had pulled big investments into colonizing a country that didn't exist, Poyes. If we look at history, what turns out, what we find out is the fact that this cycle really started about 100 years ago. And there's an important factor to that. It's the fact that in the year 1914, every big nation in the world just started leaving the gold standard. Now, the gold standard is the fact that all of the money that a central bank has, controls, or produces is only based on the amount of gold that they hold and the price of gold. Therefore, the amount of money supply available is relative to the gold that is held. This was dropped, and this is what led to a lot of financing for the First World War and even following the Second World War, because governments realized that they have this huge power that is get rid of the gold standard and we can just print money as much as we want. And in fact, this happened many times in history and was often the reason why governments, countries, or civilizations were simply dropping. The Roman Empire is a great example of that. From the moment we dropped this gold standard, so around the year 1940, the UK was the first country to do that. This is the moment where we started seeing these short-term and long-term cycles. Particularly the short-term cycles. We are now over 100 years after leaving the gold standard, and it is a fairly accepted fact that our economy works in cycles, based on a period of inflation, followed by a period of deflation. The fact this only started 100 years ago should tell you that our monetary system has flaws, all while being the reason for the unmatched growth we had as a species in the 20th century. This inflation is due to our reliance on debt and credit. According to modern monetary theory, debt is the driver of economic growth, not productivity. Ray Dalio explains this well in his video How the Economic Machine Works.
Over time, we learn, and that accumulated knowledge raises our living standards. We call this productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raise their productivity and their living standards faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that isn't necessarily true over the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver of economic swings. Debt is, because it allows us to consume more than we produce when we acquire it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce when we have to pay it back.
And as stated by Dylan Leclerc in his great article, The Conclusion of the Long-Term Debt Cycle and the Rise of Bitcoin, although productivity is the most important aspect of an economic system over the long term, not productivity but the forces of debt are the main driving forces in volatile economic swings. Coming back to the cycles, Ray Dalio describes the long-term and the short-term debt cycle and how they relate to human productivity.
Debt swings occur in two big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. While most people feel the swings, they typically don't see them as cycles because they see them too up close, day by day, week by week.
This short-term debt cycle can be observed by looking at different metrics, including the debt-to-income ratios and interest rates set by the central bank. Yes, the central bank essentially sets the rules that allow our economy to expand into unreasonable debt and later decides when it can break down. This is the so-called boom and bust cycle, the most recent ones being the global financial crisis of 2008 and the dot-com bubble of the year 2000. The long-term debt cycle is made of multiple short-term cycles. While our economy goes up and down during each of these cycles, it does bring growth in the long run. And with each cycle, our economy continues accumulating debt indefinitely, because we prefer borrowing than repaying debt. There reaches a moment when there is more debt to pay than income. Historically, this is when the long-term debt cycle shifts. People stop spending and start repaying debt, and instead of growing, we go down. We see recessions, increased government support, devaluation of currencies, social unrest, and so on. There comes a time when our economy has sufficiently deleveraged and the economy starts growing again, following the short-term debt cycle again.